At 20, Micah Rowan had 1368, a torn blue backpack held together with copper wire, and no one in the world expecting him to survive the winter. He had aged out of Colorado foster care at 18 after 9 placements, buried his mother at 6, and spent the last 2 years drifting between dishwashing jobs and ranch handwork across the Wet Mountain Valley. The night before everything changed, he slept in the bed of a county snowplow outside Mercy Fork, Colorado, until a mechanic banged the tailgate at 5:12 a.m. and told him to leave. That morning, he walked into a county tax auction and bought a condemned 19th century silver smelter for $10, a soot-blackened brick dome that 14 people in the room had laughed at, a structure the county called unsafe, and the town called cursed. He had 368 left and a 4-mile walk uphill to reach it. But when Micah pressed his hand against the sealed rear wall of the furnace and felt warm air pulling through a crack that should not have existed, he broke through the brick and found a hidden passage descending 50 feet into the mountain, and inside it, the records of a dead man who had spent 51 years trying to find him. The mechanic hit the tailgate with a wrench at 5:12 a.m., and the sound traveled through the frozen truck bed like a gunshot through a culvert. Micah Rowan sat up inside the county snowplow and felt the tarp crack at its corners where condensation had turned to ice overnight. The cold had not woken him. He had not been fully asleep. You don't sleep deeply in the back of a municipal vehicle when the temperature is 9 degrees, and the nearest locked door belongs to someone who will call the sheriff. The mechanic stood at the tailgate in coveralls and a reflective vest, breath smoking in the blue-black air. He looked at Micah, then at the tarp, then at the blue backpack pressed against the wheel well. He did not shout. "You can't be here," he said. Micah was already packing. He folded the tarp along its mildewed edge, tucked the brass compass into the front pocket where his fingers could check it without unzipping, and pulled the drawstring on the backpack until the copper wire holding the zipper together bit into his thumb. 2 pairs of wool socks, one gray, one red with holes at both heels. A paperback copy of The Call of the Wild, with a spine swollen from water damage, a toothbrush in a sandwich bag, a Polaroid of himself at 5 sitting on a porch step beside Nora Rowan, a 6-inch crescent wrench wrapped in an old t-shirt. Everything he owned fit into one container, and the container had a broken chest strap. The mechanic watched him climb out of the truck bed. He did not offer coffee or a phone or a ride. He was not cruel. He was a man with a shift starting in 18 minutes and a county vehicle that needed chains put on before the pass road opened. Micah walked. Mercy Fork, Colorado, sat in a crease between 2 ridges at 8,400 feet, the kind of town that had once been a reason to build a road and was now a reason to widen the shoulder. Main Street ran 6 blocks. The Silver Bell Diner had not opened before 7 a.m. in 3 years. The hardware store still sold seed packets in the window, and the Catholic Church still rang its bell on Sundays, though the sound carried farther than the congregation. Jensen's Market opened at 5:30 because Orville Jensen had been opening at 5:30 since 1981 and saw no reason to consult the Century about it. The fluorescent tubes inside buzzed at a pitch that made Micah's fillings ache. He set his backpack on the floor near the door, where he could see it from the register, and walked the aisle slowly because the heat worked. He counted coins in a single-folded bill on the counter. 1368 tarms. Coffee in a paper cup. 2-day-old rolls wrapped in cellophane. He picked up a box of matches, checked the price, and put them back. The woman at the register was not Orville. She was young, maybe 19, with a name tag that said Casey and the expression of someone who had already worked 4 hours today. She rang him up without commentary. The total came to $6.14. He pocketed $7.54 in change and held the coffee with both hands against the cold, pushing through the market's front glass. Outside, the sky had turned from black to the deep blue that comes just before mountain sunrise. When the air is so still, it feels like the atmosphere is holding its breath. Micah passed the church. He did not go in. The shelter cots had been full since November, and one of the volunteers still called him Michael, which was not his name, and correcting her a 4th time felt like a surrender he could not define. He passed the laundromat. His mother had lived upstairs, in a room he could not remember but that his body seemed to recognize. the way his feet slowed every time he walked past the stairwell door. He checked his phone. Tessa Lane's last text sat unread and 11 months old. "Are you okay?" He had not answered because he was not, and because the honest version of an answer would have required more than a text message and less than the pride he had left. He passed Caleb Pike's radiator shop, boarded. The sign still read, "Pike Heating and Radiator," in red letters that had faded to the color of old brick. Micah touched the crescent wrench through the backpack fabric without stopping. Caleb had taught him to hold a flashlight steady inside a boiler housing until his hands stopped shaking from the heat. Caleb had taught him that a radiator tells you what's wrong before you open it, if you put your palm flat on the casing and listen with your skin. Caleb had a stroke at 64 and lost the shop 11 months later, and the county moved Micah to a group home in Pueblo where a staff member inventoried his backpack and asked why a 16-year-old carried a wrench. Every placement after Caleb treated his knowledge of tools as evidence of something wrong. Stealing, meddling, acting grown. So he stopped offering to fix things and started keeping his hands in his pockets, which is the quietest way to let a skill die. The courthouse lobby was warm. That was the reason Micah went inside. Not civic duty, not curiosity. The lobby had baseboard heat and a wooden bench under a bulletin board, and nobody asked you to leave before 8 a.m. if you looked like you was reading the posted notices. He sat. He drank the last of his coffee. He read a flyer about dog licensing, a notice about controlled burns on Forest Service land, and a county tax auction announcement taped crookedly to the corkboard with one red thumbtack. Argent Crown Smelter parcel. County Road 17. Minimum bid. $10. Structure unsafe. Buyer assumes all risk. Micah read it twice. The auction was today at 10 a.m. in the basement meeting room. He had 754. He sat with that number for a long time. Then he unzipped the backpack, pulled out the crescent wrench, unwrapped the old t-shirt, and found the $6 bill he kept folded inside the jaw as emergency money. He smoothed it on his knee. $13.54, minus $10. Left him $3.54, plus whatever coins he had loose in the pocket lining. He knew the math was irrational. He knew a condemned smelter on a mountain road was not shelter. He knew that a 20-year-old with no address, no income, and no one expecting him to survive had no business buying property. He went downstairs at 9:48 a.m. The basement meeting room smelled like wet wool, boot mud, and the metallic bite of a coffee urn that had been heating the same pot since 7. Folding chairs sat in uneven rows. The floor was scuffed linoleum, beige under the chairs, brown near the door where snow had been tracked in and left to dry into gray puddles. 14 people sat waiting, ranchers in canvas coats, 2 scrap haulers from the valley with matching ball caps, a woman from the town board with a clipboard, a man in a fleece vest who kept checking his phone. Orville Jensen sat in the back row, arms folded, watching the room the way he watched his market aisles, not looking for anything specific, just noting what was there. The auctioneer was a county clerk named Harold Fenn, 58 years old, reading glasses on a lanyard, a voice designed for zoning meetings. He worked through 7 parcels before the Smelter. A ranch lot sold for $4,200. A vacant commercial strip went for $1,100. A gravel easement nobody wanted went unsold. Parcel 9, Harold said. Argent Crown Smelter Complex. County Road 17, 4 miles above town. Brick furnace structure, stone walls, assay outbuilding, slag yard. Structure condemned. Environmental status undetermined. Minimum bid $10. Buyer assumes all liability, all risk, all remediation obligations. He looked up from his sheet. Any takers? A rancher in the second row laughed. Those bricks are poison. Even the ghosts moved out, someone else said. My dog won't walk past it, the woman with the clipboard added, though she was smiling when she said it. Harold waited. The room settled into the particular silence of a group of people who have already decided something is worthless. Micah raised his hand. His index and middle fingers were still red from the cold. The room turned. 14 heads rotated toward the back corner, where a 20-year-old in a blue backpack sat on a folding chair, with his boots leaving wet prints on linoleum. Nobody bid against him. $10 to the young man in the back, Harold said. He made a mark on his sheet. Son, the county thanks you for assuming its headache. Micah signed the quitclaim deed with a pen borrowed from Harold's pocket. He received the stamped document, a brass key that fit nothing he would find for 3 days, a folded parcel map with water stains along the creases, and a warning sheet printed in red ink that listed 11 things the county was no longer responsible for. He walked out of the courthouse with $3.68 in his pocket and a piece of paper that said he owned something for the first time in his life. Nobody offered him a ride. The walk was 4 miles uphill on County Road 17, past the last mailbox, past the point where pavement turned to gravel and gravel turned to frozen ruts between scrub pine and red rock. The air thinned. Snow lay in the wheel tracks like poured concrete, and the wind came from the northwest carrying the smell of cold stone and distance. The Argent Crown. Smelter sat half buried in the shoulder of the mountain like something the hill had tried to swallow and given up on. Micah saw it from 200 yards, the black dome rising above the tree line, round-backed and soot-darkened, with 3 ore-bin trestles leaning beside it like broken ribs. A stone retaining wall held the slope above the yard. The assay shed roof had folded inward under decades of snow. A hoist frame stood rusted and still against the sky. The yard was paved with slag stones, glassy as bottle bottoms, and a sign hung from one chain reading Argent Crown Reduction. Works in flaked white paint that tapped against the post when the wind moved it. The air smelled of cold iron, creosote, and old smoke trapped in brick. Micah stood in the yard and looked at the dome. He did not see a condemned structure. He saw tight brickwork under the soot. He saw a stone foundation that sat deep in the slope and had not shifted. He saw a cracked arch where the keystone was still seated. He saw a rear wall where the brick color changed from smoke-dark red to newer orange, as though someone had patched it with different material at a different time. The bones were good. The brass key failed in the front hasp. He pulled the crescent wrench from his backpack, worked the flat jaw under a side door hasp where the screws had already split the wood, and levered it loose with 2 short pulls. The door opened with a dry wooden groan, and the first breath of interior air hit him. Soot, mice, cold brick, and a metallic smell so old it had become part of the walls. The main furnace dome curved overhead in blackened courses. Pale winter light fell through 2 missing roof vents and landed in rectangles on the uneven brick floor, where gray ash packed into every seam. A dead forge mouth opened waist-high in the rear wall, black inside and rimmed with slag. Rusted rails ran from the forge into a shallow pit. Bird bones lay under the east arch in a scatter of tiny white fragments. Micah moved slowly. He touched the walls. The brick was cold but dry, and the mortar between courses held when he pressed his thumbnail into it. The dome was ugly but sound. The assay room opened to the left through a low stone doorway. A counter ran along one wall, cracked ceramic cupels lined up like small bowls. A broken scale arm tilted sideways, and square outlines on the plaster showed where cabinets had hung. The air here was different, drier, carrying the smell of dust, paper rot, and mouse nests. Micah found a bent nail on the counter, 2 glass vials clouded with age, and a piece of blue chalk. He pocketed the chalk without thinking about why. The draft gallery ran behind the main forge, a low-arched passage, mostly blocked by the patched brick wall he had noticed from outside. The brick color shift was clearer here. Smoke-dark red stopped along a vertical line, and newer orange began, laid with smoother, paler mortar. A rusted iron draft wheel protruded from the wall, frozen in place, its handle thick with scale. Micah put his hand near the base of the wall. The air moved. Not wind, something steadier. A thin pull of warmth coming through a crack near the floor no wider than his thumb. He noted it and moved on. The collapsed office loft sat above the assay room, reached by a narrow iron stair with 3 missing treads. Micah tested each step with his full weight before committing. The roof was gone over half the loft, and a snowdrift had buried a charred desk against the far wall. In one drawer, ledger pages had fused together into a solid block of pulp. He found an old enamel coffee cup, chipped blue, and a warped photograph frame with the glass broken and the image bleached to a ghost. He carried the coffee cup back down. It was the only thing in the loft that was not ruined. By the time Micah returned to the main dome, the light through the roof vents had shifted from white to the pale gold that comes 2 hours before a mountain sunset. He cleared bird bones with a flat board, swept ash with a scrap of plywood, and laid his tarp on the brick floor with the mildewed edge folded under so it wouldn't touch his face. He unrolled his bedroll, sat cross-legged, and ate the second-day-old roll from Jensen's Market. The smelter was cold. Not lethal cold. The dome walls blocked wind, and the brick held a fraction of the day's weak heat, but cold enough that he folded the tarp twice around his feet and pulled his coat collar over his ears. He set the compass on the furnace lip beside his bedroll. The cracked glass caught the last stripe of daylight, and the needle swung north, then settled. Nora Rowan had given him the compass when he was 4, though he didn't remember the giving. He remembered her hand closing his fingers around it. She told him it would help him find the edge of lost. He pulled the Polaroid from the backpack and held it where the light still reached. Nora's face, half shadowed by porch lattice. Micah, at 5, holding a red plastic truck. The white border stained brown at the bottom from years of being carried in pockets and bags. He wiped a smear of ash dust from Nora's cheek with his sleeve, carefully, until the paper began to bend, and then he stopped. He placed the Polaroid under the compass. Through the missing roof vent, the stars came out. Not the faint scattered stars of a valley town, but the hard, dense field that only appears where the nearest streetlight is miles down a mountain road. The dome framed them in a circle of black brick, and they looked closer than stars had any right to be. The wind moved over the broken ore bins. Grit ticked across brick. And underneath those sounds, so faint he almost missed it, the steady pull of air behind the rear forge wall. Breathing. Micah did not feel hope. He felt stillness. For the first time in weeks, no one was going to tell him to leave before morning. He put his right hand on the crescent wrench and slept. He woke before dawn because the air near his face was wrong. Not warmer, exactly. Less cold. A narrow band of air at floor level that did not match the rest of the dome's temperature. The brick under his tarp was cool. The brick 3 feet to his left, near the base of the sealed forge wall, was not. Micah sat up. The dome was dark except for the gray square of the roof vent and the faintest seam of pre-dawn sky. He moved to the rear wall on his knees and placed both palms flat on the brick. Cold, cold, cool, warm. He pressed his ear against the wall. Nothing he could hear, but the air moved. It pulled through the thumb-width crack near the floor in a current that did not gust, did not pulse, did not stop. He tore a strip from the bread bag he had folded into his backpack pocket. He held it near the crack. The paper leaned inward and stayed there, pressed flat against the brick by air moving from the other side. Micah sat back on his heels. He remembered Caleb Pike standing beside a boiler in the shop on Route 50, holding a smoking match near a vent. If the flame bends, Caleb had said, air's moving. If it bends and doesn't come back, something's pulling. That means there's a throat open somewhere you can't see. Caleb had held the match until the sulfur burned his fingers, and then lit another without complaint. Micah went to the assay room and came back with the piece of blue chalk. He marked the warm bricks. 7 of them in a vertical column starting at the floor, then 4 more along a horizontal mortar line where the newer orange brick met the old dark red. He ran his fingers along the junction. The mortar was smoother here, paler, laid with a different trowel pattern than the rest of the dome. Someone had sealed this opening, not the original builders, someone later. He pulled the crescent wrench from his backpack and fitted the jaw around the edge of the rusted iron draft plate bolted over the old forge mouth. 3 bolts broke loose with grinding resistance. The 4th held. He sprayed it with snow melt from a bottle cap, let it soak, and worked the wrench at an angle until the threads gave. The plate came free with a sound like a sigh. Behind it, brick. But brick he could test. He found a bent rail spike in the slag pit and used it as a cold chisel, tapping the exposed mortar with the flat of the crescent wrench. Solid, solid, hollow. He tapped again. Solid, hollow, hollow. He marked the hollow points with chalk. Then he retrieved the 8LB sledgehammer he had seen leaning against a wall in the assay shed, tested its handle for splits, and swung. The newer mortar cracked on the third blow. Brick dust puffed into the dome. He worked the mortar line, tapping, then prying, until the first brick slid out into his hands. Warm on the inside face, he pulled 16 more. Each one came warm. The opening grew from a single brick to a dark rectangle wide enough to press his shoulders through, and the air that poured out of it was not cold, not hot, but steady, mineral smelling, earth damp, 55 degrees where the dome was below freezing. Micah shone his cheap flashlight into the cavity. The beam reached a curved brick throat descending into the hill behind the dome. A tunnel, brick-lined, soot-scored along the crown. The floor was dry stone, and the air came from below, rising in a column that did not waver. He crawled through. The passage led downward at a shallow angle, widening into a junction where 4 shafts split in different directions. Iron gates, rusted open, marked each branch. Side tunnels ran laterally under the hillside. 2 vertical shafts dropped deeper, with ladder rungs hammered into the rock walls. Micah climbed down the first shaft, testing each rung, and found the temperature rising with every foot of descent. 50 feet below grade, the air held stable, warm, quiet, and constant, the Earth's own heat stored below the frost line and rising through the brick network like breath through lungs. The smelter was not warm by accident. It was built on a ventilation system designed to feed air to industrial fires, and the fires had died, but the Earth hadn't. In a dry side chamber above the lower intake, Micah found what Silas Voss had left, a waxed canvas satchel. Inside it, a black composition book. Behind it, on a stone shelf, 12 brown ledger books wrapped in waxed canvas. A steel lockbox, heavy, padlocked with a combination lock that opened on the 3rd try when Micah used the date stamped inside the satchel flap. Do 9 Tata 1468. He opened the composition book first. The handwriting was small, neat, and upright, written with a sharpened pencil that left grooves in the paper. The first entry was dated January 3, 1968. January 9, 1978. Mercer baby coughing, fixed stovepipe, left before Helen woke, no charge. He turned pages. November 3, 1986. Pike boy needs boots, size 7. Don't give cash to Dale, buy direct, February 14, 1999. Nora Rowan upstairs at laundromat. Heat out. Paid 4 months. Baby due soon. She asked nothing. Micah stopped turning. He read the entry again. His mother's name in someone else's handwriting, written before he was born. Decker 22, 2005. Micah Rowan moved again. County says Pueblo. Sent $60 for coat through church office. No name, his own coat. A man he had never met had tracked him through county records and sent warmth to him through a church he didn't attend. The lockbox held $4,700 in cash, 20s and 50s banded with rubber bands gone brittle, and $18,600 in matured savings bonds. A folded statement on bank letterhead showed a trust account with a balance of $86,420.17 reserved for heat, shelter, tools, and continuation of the Voss Winter Fund. Beneath the lockbox, photographs. Silas Voss at 31, standing beside the smelter dome with mortar on both sleeves. The Argent Crown crew, 11 men in wool coats, 1 boy holding a lunch pail. Nora Rowan at 19, laughing beside the laundromat stairs, 1 hand on her pregnant belly. Micah held the photograph until his flashlight beam trembled. Caleb Pike shaking Silas's hand outside a radiator shop. Both men looking away from the camera. Micah at 5 in a red coat he did not remember owning, a sealed envelope, addressed in pencil. The one who finds the warm air. He opened it with his thumbnail. The letter was 2 pages, written in the same neat hand, though the pencil pressed harder and the lines slanted more than the early journal entries. If you're reading this, you found your way inside instead of past it. I built this system because fire needs air and so do people. The company dug the shafts for smelting. I maintain them for living. The earth gives heat freely if you build the right throat to carry it. Mercy Fork laughed at me when I said, this furnace could keep people warm through winter. The county blocked me over permits. Insurance said no. The bank said no. So I sealed the tunnels, kept the brick, and left instructions for whoever needed the place badly enough to listen to it. Open the draft doors. Keep coffee where people can smell it. Let cold people come in before they ask. The money is not a fortune. It is enough to fix the roof, feed the boiler, and keep someone warm for 40 winters if you are careful. The records are in the cabinet. Every family I helped is filed by name. I did not help them because they deserved it. I helped them because heat is not charity when a person is freezing. It is the first tool. I am sorry I could not keep better track of you. The county moves files faster than I can follow, but I watched when I could. If you are cold, stay. In the metal filing cabinet in the dry chamber, Micah found alphabetized folders. Each one contained names, dates, amounts, and follow-up notes written in the same hand. Pike, Caleb. Radiator shop fire, 1994. Replaced boiler. Paid electric. Good man. Takes in boys nobody else keeps. Rowan, Nora. Pregnant. No family. Proud. Do not embarrass her. Micah placed the Polaroid of himself and Nora beside the photograph from Silas's collection. Same jaw, same porch, same lattice shadow falling across a face that was young enough to believe everything would be fine. He picked up the compass and held it against his sternum. The cracked glass pressed cold through his shirt. The needle pointed north, which was the direction of nothing and everything, and he sat in the warm dark under the mountain and did not move for a long time. Orville Jensen's 1989 Ford F-150 ground up the Orr Road at 8:30 the next morning, its cracked windshield catching sun at an angle that threw a line of light across the dash. The truck parked crooked on the slag stones, and Orville stepped out slowly, boots finding purchase on the icy gravel. He stood in the yard for a full minute. He looked at the missing bricks in the rear wall. He looked at Micah's split knuckles. He looked at the iron draft plate leaning against the dome wall and the pile of orange bricks stacked neatly beside the opening. He studied the warm air moving out of the cavity, took off one glove, and let it pass over his fingers. Then he spoke. "You found the throat," Orville said. Micah nodded. Orville walked to his truck bed and returned with a dented green thermos, 2 ham biscuits wrapped in wax paper, and a wool blanket folded into a square. "Coffee's black," he said. "Biscuits are from yesterday. Blanket's been in the truck box since deer season." He poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it to Micah. The steam rose in a straight column in the still mountain air. "Silas Voss kept accounts at my store for 31 years, Orville said. He leaned against the truck. People who never knew they had accounts. He'd come in Tuesday mornings, pay what they owed, and leave before they showed up. Never wanted a receipt, never wanted thanks. He called it keeping accounts balanced. He wrote about everyone," Micah said. "That's Silas." Orville looked at the dome. Town laughed at that furnace because town never had to sleep in it. He finished his coffee, screwed the cap back on the thermos, and left without asking where Micah came from or how long he'd been sleeping in snowplow beds. At his truck door, he paused. "I've got stovepipe, some hinges, and a coffee pot that doesn't owe anybody anything," he said. "I'll bring them up tomorrow." The Ford rattled back down the Orr Road, and Micah stood in the yard with a wool blanket and the smell of ham grease on wax paper, and the mountain was quiet except for wind. Mara Pike's Subaru died halfway up County Road 17 on the 3rd morning. Micah heard the engine coughing from the yard, a wet, strangled sound followed by a hiss of steam punching through the grill, and walked down the road with the crescent wrench in his back pocket. The Subaru sat sideways in a rut, hood up, coolant pooling green on the frozen gravel. Mara Pike stood beside it with her arms crossed. Black hair cut blunt at her jaw. One silver hoop earring, steel toe boots stained with radiator coolant, grease under her right thumbnail. She looked at Micah's hands first, then the smelter dome above the tree line, then the open rear draft plate visible from the road. "Draft wheel's spinning," she said. It was not a question. "I freed it," Micah said. She studied the air for another 5 seconds. Then she popped the Subaru's radiator cap, diagnosed a cracked hose at the lower junction, pulled a utility knife from her coat pocket, cut the split section clean, sleeved it with a length of copper pipe from her toolbox, clamped both ends with worm drive clamps, and filled the system with snowmelt that Micah warmed over his camp stove. The engine turned over on the second try. Then she walked up to the smelter. She did not ask permission. She moved through the main dome the way someone moves through a building they're reading, not touring. She knelt by the frozen draft wheel, the large one, not the plate Micah had removed, and studied the mechanism. She pulled a can of penetrating oil from her coat, sprayed the bearing, waited 2 minutes, fitted a 3/8-inch socket onto the adjustment bolt, and leaned into the handle with steady pressure until the wheel broke free with a grinding pop. She spun it once. Warm air surged through the dome. "Your grandfather's Caleb Pike," Micah said. "Was." She wiped the socket on her jeans. "Shop's gone. Tools are gone. He's in a facility in Pueblo, and he doesn't know my name on Tuesdays." Micah didn't say he was sorry. He said, "I found more than I can fix." Mara looked at the dome, at the stacked bricks, at the open shaft descending into the hill. She looked at the crescent wrench in Micah's back pocket and the initials scratched into the handle. "I'll work 1 week," she said. "Don't make it weird." They worked. The first repair was the rear wall. Micah and Mara reset the 17 removed bricks into a removable inspection frame, mixing lime mortar in a plastic bucket and fitting 2 salvage strap hinges so the section could swing open without a sledgehammer next time. Mara cut the hinge plates with a hacksaw and drilled mounting holes with a hand drill borrowed from Orville's barn. The mortar set overnight in the warm draft air. The second repair was the upper vents. Micah climbed a hooked length of rebar through the chimney flue and dragged out 4 bird nests, a shredded tarp, and enough pine needles to fill a canvas feed sack. Clean air moved through the dome for the first time in years. By the 3rd day, Orville had delivered stovepipe fittings, a box of 16 penny nails, and 8 lengths of 2x6 lumber from his barn. Micah and Mara replaced the broken door planks, planed the edges with a hand plane until they seated flush, and hung the door on its original iron pintles. It closed. For the first time in decades, the main entrance to the Argent Crown smelter shut against the wind. Helen Mercer, 66, arrived on the 4th morning in a station wagon with rust along the rocker panels. She studied the new door, the spinning draft wheel, and Micah's chalk marks on the brick before she said a word. She brought 3 jars of beef stew, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel. "Made too much," she said. "Silas fixed my baby's stovepipe in 1978. I wasn't going to forget that." Duke Alvarez, 54, came the same afternoon with a truckload of scrap plywood from a shed teardown. He unloaded it without being asked and stacked the sheets against the retaining wall where they'd stay dry. "Silas paid my father's hospital bill when the shaft collapsed," Duke said. "Dad never knew who paid it. I found the receipt in Silas's records after he died." Pastor Edwin Cole, 61, brought 6 wool blankets from the church basement. Nina Spence, 38, brought a box of mismatched mugs from the Silver Bell Diner. Rafe Klein, 17, brought labor, claiming school service hours that no teacher had assigned. Each one arrived without announcement. Each one studied the property before speaking. Each one connected their offering to Silas Voss through a specific act of past kindness, a repaired furnace, a paid bill, a pair of boots left in a mudroom, and each one left without lingering. Mara patched the assay room window with plexiglass cut on a straight edge with a utility knife. Micah built a raised sleeping platform from pallet boards so the bedding stayed off the cold brick. Rafe cleaned and labeled the draft gates with a wire brush, chalk marks, and machine oil, while Mara showed him which gates controlled airflow to which tunnels. Mountain news traveled without wires. By the third morning, people arrived already knowing the dome was warm. On the fifth day, Orville set a white 12-cup drip coffee maker on the assay room counter, plugged it into a battery inverter he'd wired to a marine battery, and said nothing. By afternoon, the smell of coffee reached the yard, and people who had no reason to climb County Road 17 found reasons. The smelter remained black-bricked and scarred. The slag yard still glinted underfoot. The hoist frame still rusted against the sky, but the entry door closed. Light came through clean plexiglass. A table stood where ash had been. The draft wheel turned. And the old furnace, which had not been a room in 43 years, became one again. Ellis Darrow's pearl-white Range Rover climbed the ore road on the 9th day without slipping. The tires were clean. The paint was clean. The vehicle cost more than most families in Mercy Fork cleared in a year, and it moved through the frozen landscape like something from a different economy. Micah heard the engine before he saw it, deep, smooth, and quiet in a way that announced money. He set down the framing square he was showing Rafe how to hold and walked to the yard. Ellis Darrow stepped out. Charcoal wool overcoat, polished black boots, leather gloves the color of espresso, a silver watch on his left wrist that caught the sun and threw a small bright circle onto the slag stones. He was 48, tall, and he studied the smelter the way a man studies acreage on a spreadsheet, measuring, calculating, assigning value per square foot. He looked at the spinning draft wheel. He looked at the repaired door. He looked at Micah, at the chalk dust on his jeans, at the split knuckles, at the grease under his nails. He took his time. "You're the buyer," Ellis said. "I'm the owner," Micah said. Ellis reached into his coat and produced a business card. Darrow Mountain Holdings. The cardstock was heavy, cream-colored, embossed. "The county sale is complicated," Ellis said. His voice was even, practiced, and warm in the way that voices are warm when they have been trained to sound reasonable. "The parcel sits inside a development corridor for a heritage resort that my company has been planning for 3 years. The tax auction didn't attach an environmental remediation lien that should have been attached. There's an old mining easement that gives my company access rights through this yard." He paused. "I'm prepared to offer $2,500 for a clean transfer. That's generous given the liabilities you've assumed." Micah looked at the business card. He looked at the Range Rover. He looked at the smelter dome, where coffee steam drifted from the assay room vent. "I bought it cold," Micah said. "I'll keep it warm." Ellis studied him for 3 more seconds. Then he nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, the way a man nods when he has expected a refusal and prepared for it. "Think about it," Ellis said. "The offer won't last." He walked back to the Range Rover. The door closed with a sound like a vault ceiling. Gravel snapped under the tires as the vehicle descended the ore road, polished and white against the black pines. Mara picked up the business card where it had fallen in the slush by the door. She pinned it under a coffee mug on the assay room counter without reading it. 4 days later, a county deputy climbed the ore road and handed Micah a certified envelope. The letter inside was printed on heavy stock, dense with language that read like a different dialect. Petition to quiet title. Defective notice of tax sale. Environmental remediation line. Easement interference. Motion for temporary injunction. The letterhead said Darrow Mountain Holdings, LLC, and the law firm beneath it had 3 names and an address in Denver. Micah read the first page twice. He stopped when he reached the filing deadline. 21 days. He sat at the assay room counter with the letter spread under the coffee maker, the compass in his left hand, and the knowledge that he might lose the only warm place he had ever owned, settling into his chest like a stone dropped into still water. If you've made it this far into Micah's story, hit subscribe because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Orville Jensen read the letter twice at the assay room counter, his lips moving slightly on the legal language the way they moved when he counted inventory. He folded it along its original creases, slid it back into the envelope, and stood. "Stay here," he said. He drove the 1989 Ford down the ore road without explaining where he was going. Micah cleaned the draft gates. Mara replaced a corroded hinge pin on the inspection frame. Rafe swept slag dust from the entry. Nobody mentioned the letter. The coffee maker cycled through its second pot, and the dome stayed warm, and the mountain did not care about filing deadlines. Orville returned 4 hours later with a woman in the passenger seat. Alma Redbird stepped out of the truck in snow boots and a black wool coat that fell past her knees. She was 67 years old, narrow-shouldered, with silver hair pulled back in a clip and reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She carried a leather briefcase with brass latches that had been restitched at both corners. She stood in the slag yard and looked at the dome. She looked at the spinning draft wheel. She looked at the open inspection frame and the warm air moving through it. She looked at Micah's hands, at the chalk dust, at the crescent wrench hanging from a belt loop. She looked at the coffee maker through the assay room window. Then she spoke. "Orville says you have paperwork," Alma said. "I have a filing cabinet full of it," Micah said. "Show me everything." Micah led her through the dome, down the brick throat, and into the dry side chamber where Silas Voss had stored 51 years of records. Alma set her briefcase on the stone shelf, put on her reading glasses, and began pulling folders. She worked for 3 hours. She read the quitclaim deed. She read the county auction notice. She read the parcel map. She read Silas's caretaker affidavit, notarized in 2004, declaring his continuous maintenance of the smelter since 1968. She read the trust provision, handwritten on legal paper and witnessed by a notary in Mercy Fork, dedicating the furnace and tunnels to emergency shelter use if the property ever passed to a resident in need of heat. She read the original company abandonment notice from 1980, when the Argent Crown Mining Company dissolved its Colorado holdings and wrote off the smelter as scrap value. She read the survey map. She unfolded it on the counter, smoothed it flat, and traced the easement line with her index finger. "Darrow's easement crosses the ore road," Alma said. "Not the furnace yard. The road. The yard was never part of the mining access corridor." She tapped the survey legend. "He's claiming rights to a parcel his easement doesn't touch." She found the county remediation letter from 2019, a one-page document stating that the county had chosen tax sale in lieu of demolition because the main dome was structurally stable and the environmental assessment showed no active contamination above threshold levels. "There's no lien," Alma said. "The county chose sale over demolition. That's the opposite of an outstanding remediation obligation." Micah sat on a crate and watched her organize documents into labeled stacks. She moved the way Silas's handwriting moved, methodical, unhurried, precise. "How much do you charge?" he asked. Alma took off her reading glasses and let them hang on the cord. She looked at the filing cabinet, at the alphabetized folders, at the name Redbird visible on a tab near the front. "Silas Voss paid my law school application fees in 1976, she said. "He mailed my first winter coat to Denver because he heard I'd gone up there without one." She put her glasses back on. "This one was paid before you were born." The hearing was held 14 days later in the county courtroom upstairs from the clerk's office. The room smelled of wet coats, floor wax, and the radiator that clanked against the east wall every 90 seconds. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. 3 rows of wooden benches, half filled. Orville sat in the back. Mara sat beside him with her arms crossed. Helen Mercer sat behind them, knitting without looking at her needles. Ellis Darrow sat on the opposite side in his charcoal suit, flanked by an attorney from Denver in a navy blazer with a leather portfolio. The attorney was young, sharp-jawed, and spoke in paragraphs. Judge Carolyn Vega presided. She was 59, wire-rimmed glasses, no expression that gave anything away. She read the filings while both sides waited. The Denver attorney argued defective notice. He argued that the county had failed to attach the remediation lien prior to auction, rendering the sale procedurally invalid. He argued that the mining easement granted Darrow Mountain Holdings access through the furnace yard, and that the current occupants' modifications to the structure constituted interference with that access. He argued risk to public safety. He used the words irresponsible, and unqualified, without raising his voice, which made them land harder. Alma stood. She entered the survey map as Exhibit C, Silas Voss's notarized caretaker affidavit as Exhibit D, and the county auction record as Exhibit E. The easement in question crosses the ore road at its surveyed boundary, Alma said. It does not cross, touch, or reference the furnace yard. The petitioner is claiming access rights to a parcel his easement does not describe. She paused. The county chose tax sale in lieu of demolition. The remediation assessment is referenced in the county's own 2019 letter, which concludes that no active contamination exists above threshold. There is no outstanding lien. There was no defective notice. The auction was posted, advertised, and conducted pursuant to statute. She looked at Judge Vega. I'd also note, Your Honor, that the petitioner did not bid at the auction. He is now asking this court to void a sale he chose not to participate in. The Denver attorney objected. Judge Vega overruled. The courtroom was quiet for 11 seconds. Micah counted them because counting was something he could control. Motion denied, Judge Vega said. The sale stands. The easement is limited to the ore road as surveyed. I find no defective notice, no outstanding lien, and no standing for the petitioner to challenge a tax sale he did not attend. She struck her gavel once. The sound was smaller than Micah expected. Outside the courtroom, the air was cold and bright. Micah stood on the courthouse steps and released the crescent wrench he had been gripping inside his coat pocket since the hearing began. His fingers opened one at a time, stiff from how hard he had been holding on. Mara stood beside him. She didn't say anything. Orville put his hat on and walked to the truck. Alma Redbird came down the steps, briefcase in hand, and stopped next to Micah. The trust is clean, she said. The deed is yours. Use the money the way he intended. She looked at the mountains. Keep coffee where people can smell it. She got in Orville's truck, and they drove away. The records came home from the hearing in 2 cardboard boxes that Mara carried into the dry chamber and began reorganizing by alphabet. Micah was upstairs in the loft, framing new roof joists over the open section where snow had been coming in for decades. He heard Mara stop moving. Micah! He came down the iron stair. Mara was sitting on the stone floor of the chamber with a manila envelope in her lap. The envelope was filed under a tab that read, Pike, Rowan, Lane, Dependent Children. It had been misfiled behind the Redbird folder. She held it out without opening it. Micah sat beside her. The chamber was warm. The draft air moved steadily through the brick throat above them, and the only sound was the faint hum of earth breathing through stone. He opened the envelope. Inside, 4 pages of Silas's handwriting, a receipt from a church office, and a carbon copy of a letter sent to the Pueblo Department of Human Services. The handwriting told the story in the same small, practical notes Silas used for everything. February 14, 1999. Nora Rowan upstairs at laundromat. Heat out. Paid 4 months through Jensen. She does not know my name. That is correct. August 3, 1999. Boy born. Micah. 7LB4 Oz. Nora names him for her father. No one in Mercy Fork claims him. I will. June 12, 2005. Nora gone. Pneumonia. Boy in county system. File moving. Cannot reach the right office. Sent letter requesting informal guardianship. Denied. I am 78 and not a relative. June 30th, 2005. Contacted Caleb Pike in Pueblo. Pike runs a radiator shop. Warm house. Good hands. Told him about the Rowan boy. Pike said he would apply. September 15, 2005. Pike has the boy. Thank God. Micah set the page down. He picked up the next one. Okada 1, 2007. Pike had a stroke. Boy moved again. I cannot keep up. County says Montrose, then Grand Junction, then back to Pueblo. Each time I call, they transfer me. Each time I write, the address has changed. Decker 22, 2008. Sent $60 for a coat through church office. No name on the envelope. I don't know if it arrived. March 4th, 2012. Boy is 13. No permanent placement. I have tried 4 times to become his guardian. Denied each time. Too old. No blood relation. No legal standing. I am watching a child disappear through a system that does not keep records as well as I do. The last page was shorter. The handwriting slanted more. The pencil pressed harder. John, 18, 2016. I am 89. I will not see the Rowan boy become a man, but the tunnels still breathe. The dome still holds. The money is in the lockbox. If he comes here, if anyone comes here cold enough to listen to the walls, the place will do what I could not. It will stay. Micah did not move. His hands shook. The pages rattled against his knees. The brass compass sat in his coat pocket, and he pulled it out and pressed it against his chest with both hands, the cracked glass cold through his shirt, the needle pointing north inside its housing. Mara knelt beside him. She did not touch him. The chamber was quiet. The warm air moved through the brick throat above them, steady as it had been for decades, carrying the earth's heat into a room built for fire and kept for something gentler. Micah sat on the stone floor with his mother's name and his own name written in a dead man's hand, and the pages shook, and the air breathed, and the compass pointed north. I wasn't lost to everybody, he said. His voice broke on the last word, not dramatically, the way a voice breaks when it finds a sentence it has needed to say for 15 years and discovers that saying it does not fix anything but changes everything. Mara sat beside him. She picked up the scattered pages and squared them against her knee and slid them back into the envelope without reading them again. She set the envelope on the stone shelf beside the ledgers. She did not tell him it was going to be okay. She did not tell him Silas would be proud. She sat in the warm air and let the silence hold what words couldn't. Micah pressed the compass harder against his chest. After a long time, he stood. He climbed the iron stair. He went back to the loft and picked up the framing square where he had left it. But he moved differently after that. Slower. Not from grief. From weight. The weight of knowing that someone had spent 17 years trying to keep him visible in a system designed to let children disappear, and that the effort had failed, and that the record of the effort was more than anyone else had left him. He stopped treating the smelter as a hiding place. He started treating it as a debt he could repay forward. Tessa Lane arrived 11 days later in a rental sedan with summer tires that spun twice on the ore road before catching gravel. The car was white, economy class, and had a Hertz sticker on the rear bumper. She parked beside Orville's truck and sat behind the wheel for a full minute before getting out. She was 22. Sharp-featured, dark hair pulled into a knot, a denim jacket too thin for the altitude. She stood in the slag yard with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the expression of someone who had driven 3 hours to confirm a disaster. She looked at the smelter dome. She looked at the spinning draft wheel. She looked at the repaired door, the clean plexiglass, the coffee steam rising from the assay room vent. She looked at Micah, who stood in the yard with a hand plane and sawdust on his jeans. "You're living inside a chimney," she said. "Technically beside one," Micah said. "You spent your last dollar on a condemned brick oven on a mountain." $10. "That's not the point, Micah." "It kind of is." Tessa did not laugh. She walked past him into the dome, and Micah let her. She moved through the main space, the assay room, the draft gallery. She touched the walls the way someone touches walls when they are checking for delusion, pressing hard, expecting the whole thing to be a fever dream that collapses under pressure. It didn't collapse. She came back out and stood in the yard. The wind had picked up, pushing cloud shadows across the ridge. Mara was on the dome roof, sealing a vent collar with roofing tar and a putty knife. "Who's that?" Tessa asked. "Mara Pike, Caleb's granddaughter." Tessa's expression shifted by 1 degree. She had known Caleb. She had been in Caleb's house for 7 months before the stroke, before Micah was moved, and she was moved, and nobody moved them to the same place. She stayed because the sun was going down, and the road was icy, and because leaving first was what Tessa Lane always did, and she was tired of always doing it. That night, the Arctic front that had been building over the divide dropped onto Mercy Fork like a door slamming. The temperature fell 30 degrees in 2 hours. Water barrels froze in timber cabins along the creek. Pipes burst in 3 houses on the valley floor. The first family came up the ore road at 8:40 p.m. a man and a woman with two children wrapped in sleeping bags in the back seat of a truck. The man's name was Packer. He said their pipes had burst and the church was full. Micah opened the dome doors. Then another family. Then Helen Mercer with her brother, 71, on supplemental oxygen, the tank balanced on a handcart. Then Duke Alvarez with his mother-in-law and a dog the size of a calf. Then Rafe Klein with 3 blankets and a bag of firewood. Micah and Mara opened the draft gates. Warm air poured up through the tunnels and into the dome. Mara adjusted the flow with the draft wheel, balancing the temperature so the front of the room stayed warmer and the back stayed cool enough for the oxygen equipment. Micah laid blankets on the sleeping platforms. He counted heads. He checked the children's socks and replaced wet ones with dry pairs from the supply shelf. He taped a piece of cardboard over a draft leak near the door frame. He did not perform kindness. He moved through the room the way Caleb Pike had moved through the shop, checking, adjusting, anticipating the next failure before it happened. He moved like someone responsible for mourning. Tessa stood by the assay room counter and watched. She watched Micah hand a mug of coffee to Packer's wife without asking her name. She watched him adjust the oxygen tank position so the tubing ran clear of foot traffic. She watched him kneel beside the Packer children and ask if they wanted to see how the draft wheel worked. She watched 6 families sleep warm inside a building that every reasonable person in Mercy Fork had called worthless. The next morning, after the temperature rose and the families drove home, Tessa sat at the assay room counter with a cup of coffee and the filing cabinet open beside her. Micah had told her about the records. She had not asked to see them. She looked now. She found her own folder. Lane, Tessa, inside. A dental bill paid in 2007. A school lunch account funded from 2006 to 2009. A handwritten note in Silas's careful script. Lane girl protects Rowan boy. Protect both, if possible. She held the folder on her lap. Her hands were still. Her face was not. Micah sat beside her. The coffee maker gurgled. Warm air moved through the dome. Outside, meltwater dripped from the eaves in slow ticks that sounded like a clock starting. I thought leaving first meant it hurt less, Tessa said. Did it? No. She did not move in immediately. She stayed 3 nights. She organized the filing cabinet by date in addition to alphabet. She helped Mara weather strip the assay room door. She argued with Micah about the sleeping platform layout and won. On the 4th morning, she called her job in Pueblo and asked about remote hours. She did not tell Micah she was staying. She unpacked her bag into the loft, and that was answer enough. Ellis Darrow came back on a Tuesday in early April. No Range Rover, no overcoat, no lawyer. He drove a mud-splashed blue pickup with a cracked taillight and a bed full of building materials. He parked in the slag yard and sat in the cab for a moment before getting out. He wore jeans, a canvas work jacket, and boots that had seen dirt before today. No watch, no business card. He stood in the yard and watched Micah showing Rafe Klein how to hold a framing square, the long arm against the board edge, the short arm marking the cut line, the pencil held flat so the mark stayed consistent. He watched the people inside the dome drinking coffee from mismatched mugs. He watched the draft wheel turning. He looked at the draft wheel longest. Alma Redbird had sent him a copy of his own folder. He had opened it at his kitchen table in his house in the valley, the house built with money earned from a career built on a college degree, built on a scholarship that a man named Silas Voss had funded without ever attaching his name to it. Darrow, Ellis. Father drank wages. Boy, bright. Tuition deposit sent to Western State under scholarship name. Do not tell the boy. Let him believe he earned it. He did. The money just made sure he could. Ellis unloaded the truck. 14 sheets of rigid insulation, cedar planks, 2 boxes of deck screws, a signed withdrawal of claim folded into an envelope. He carried the insulation sheets himself. They were heavy and awkward in the wind, and he braced them against his hip the way a man braces something when he is used to other people carrying things for him and has decided to stop. Micah met him at the assay room door. "Where do you want these?" Ellis said. "Assay room wall." Ellis nodded. He carried the sheets inside, stacked them where Micah pointed, and went back for the cedar. He did not apologize. He did not make a speech. He set the envelope with the withdrawal on the counter beside the coffee maker and went back to unloading. Rafe watched from the doorway. Mara watched from the roof. Orville poured Ellis a cup of coffee without being asked and set it on the tailgate where Ellis would find it. Ellis found it. He drank it standing in the slag yard, looking up at the black dome and the spinning draft wheel, and if he was calculating the value per square foot, it was a different kind of calculation than the one he had come with the first time. 4 months later, late May. Snow remained in the shaded cuts above 9,000 feet, but below that, the high country had turned. Meltwater ran under the ore road in channels that caught sunlight and threw it back in moving ribbons. Aspens had leafed out along the creek, pale green and trembling. Wildflowers, columbine, Indian paintbrush, lupine pushed through the slag yard in clusters that should not have grown in gravel but did anyway. The Argent Crown smelter was still black-bricked and scarred, the hoist frame still rusted against the sky. The slag yard still glinted underfoot. But the main door opened smoothly on greased pintles. The assay room held shelves stocked with blankets, mugs, a first aid box, canned goods, and a wall map of the tunnel system that Mara had drawn in colored pencil on butcher paper. The draft gates were labeled with brass tags. The dome stayed cool on spring afternoons and warm through cold nights, and the coffee maker had been replaced by a 30-cup commercial urn that Orville had found at a restaurant auction in Salida. Mercy Fork held a Saturday repair clinic at the smelter now. Mara Pike fixed a school bus heater core in the yard, kneeling on a creeper with her socket set arranged by size on a magnetic tray. Orville poured coffee and told stories to anyone who stood still long enough. Tessa checked people in with a clipboard and a pen she kept behind her ear, managing the schedule with the same protective efficiency she had once used to manage survival. Alma Redbird sat by the assay room window with a cup of tea and a stack of trust documents, reviewing the Voss Winter Fund's first quarterly filing. Rafe Klein and Ellis Darrow worked side by side in the yard, planing cedar for new benches, Rafe asking questions about grain direction, and Ellis answering them with the patience of a man who had recently learned what it cost to receive help and pretend you'd earned it alone. Micah had filed the paperwork to register the smelter as an emergency warming shelter with the county. The application had taken 3 weeks and 2 inspections. The county inspector had walked through the dome, tested the draft system, checked the structural report Alma had commissioned, and signed off with the note, "Structure sound. Ventilation system unique but functional. Approved for seasonal emergency use." The locals did not call it the Argent Crown smelter. They called it the warm room. Micah had started the Voss Winter Fund with the trust money, administered through Alma's office, open to any family in the valley that needed heat, shelter, or tools. He was enrolled in a night HVAC certification course in Pueblo, driving down the mountain 3 evenings a week in a truck Orville had sold him for $1 and a handshake. The course textbook sat on the assay room counter beside the coffee urn, its spine already cracked, its margins filled with notes in Micah's handwriting. Small, neat, and upright, a habit he had not noticed picking up. That evening, the light turned copper on the slag stones. The sky above the ridge went from blue to amber to a deep violet that held its color long after the sun dropped behind the peaks. The dome lamps came on one by one. Battery-powered lanterns hung from hooks that Mara had welded to the iron roof ribs. The smell of coffee mixed with wet pine and warm brick, and the air moving through the furnace mouth carried the earth's heat into the room the way it had for more than a century, constant and indifferent to whoever stood inside it. The brass compass sat on the assay room shelf under the tunnel map. The cracked glass caught the lantern light. The needles still pointed north. The Polaroid of Micah and Nora was framed now, hung on the wall beside Silas Voss's photograph. Silas at 31, mortar on his sleeves, standing next to the dome he would spend the rest of his life maintaining. The 2 frames touched at the corners. Nora's half-shadowed face, Silas's steady gaze. The same building behind both of them, 50 years apart. The 6-inch crescent wrench hung from a nail above the workbench, chrome worn smooth at the thumb wheel, the initials CP still visible in the handle. Cleaned but not polished, a tool that worked. The blue backpack rested under Micah's cot in the loft, where the new roof joists held, and the stars showed through a skylight Mara had framed from salvaged glass. The backpack was not packed for running. The chest strap was still broken. The copper wire zipper pull was still there. But the bag sat open, and the things that had once been Micah's entire life were distributed now. Compass on the shelf, wrench on the wall, Polaroid on display, tarp folded in the emergency supply closet where someone else might need it. Micah stood in the dome doorway as the last light faded. Rafe and Ellis had gone home. Tessa was in the loft, working on her laptop. Mara was in the yard, wiping down her tools. Orville had left an hour ago with a wave and a promise to bring more coffee in the morning, the way he had promised every evening for 4 months. The stars came out over the ridge, not the stars of the valley, washed pale by distance and light. The hard, dense mountain stars that only show where the air is thin and the nearest streetlight is miles down a road someone else built. They filled the circle of sky above the dome, the way they had on Micah's first night, when he lay on a tarp on cold brick with a crescent wrench under his hand and no one telling him to leave. Home was not the place that found him. Home was the place he learned to keep open. The smelter door stayed open after dark. A yellow light burned inside the black brick dome. Warm air moved through the old furnace mouth, carrying heat from 50 feet below the frozen ground into a room where the coffee was always on and the draft wheel always turned. The place waited for morning.